What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Aurélie Thiele, talking about her book, The Paris Understudy. That book is available now. Such a great conversation with Aurélie. It was really interesting to hear her research process, like how she came up with the idea of the two opera singers during World War II France in Paris, and just like how she had to get in the headspace and how she approached like just really dark subject matters and really troubling historical events that occurred during that time. But either way, I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Aurelie.
Okay, so today we've got Aurélie Thiele. We're talking about the Paris Understudy. That book is available on September 10th. Aurélie, thank you so much for joining me today. This book, oh, hit me in the feels. I'm a mom of two young boys. It was like I'm a sucker for historical fiction too, so it just like really you drove it in hard a little bit, really existential crisis a little bit, but in morality, all that good stuff. I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for understanding the book and loving the book. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I don't know. I think as I progressed through it, and we'll get into it, but it was just almost you're watching the characters make choices and you're just like, "No."
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's a part of the experience. So to get started, can you give like a summary of the book so that people can follow along with the conversation?
Sure. It's a novel about two opera singers in Paris during World War II. And one is initially the understudy of the other. And they have to make choices to decide how much they're willing to do for the art and to save the people they love.
Yeah, in a nutshell. So, can you go into your background a little bit and either professional or personal, just what led you to release this story into the world?
This is going to take some time, but
No worries.
I'll try to be short. I'm French and American, but I was original French, and I was in college in Paris. And even as a high school student, I would go to the opera. I was born and raised in Brussels, in Belgium, and we would go to the opera. And so I was very comfortable with a lot of operas, and also walking around in Paris when I was in my 20s, and you still see to these days plaques that says here fell this person on the liberation of Paris in August 25th, 1944. And it's very powerful. And about maybe, I'll say 12 years ago, maybe, I found out about this opera singer, Germaine Lubin, who had been very famous before World War II. She also sang a lot of German operas, and she associated with the Nazis. And then after the war, she was jailed for national treason and never resumed her career. And I thought it would just be interesting to think about a situation where decent people could be little by little led to make wrong choices. Like what you mentioned, where when you see it, because you know how World War II ended, you're just like, girl, don't do this. And
Mhm.
I wanted to help the reader think of a situation where people like Yvonne, who was a single mother trying to protect her son, could little by little make awful choices, even if she never denounced anybody or never did anything to hurt anybody. Those were still, in the end, very complicated choices, which also makes them interesting choices because when it's very clear what you should do at a given moment, it's not really a choice. And so I thought just putting her in a situation where she tries to help her son, save her son, would be just something interesting to explore. So that's how I got started. But I also have to say, it took me 12 years to reach to this version of the book because I started writing and I had a couple of finished versions, but they were not working. And it evolved over many years to really nail down what I felt was the heart of the book.
Yeah, I can imagine it could get tricky and really just to not only balance that, the historical fiction aspect of it and like the human side of it, and also how do you emotionally engage the reader? And it's I can and you're not alone. A lot of authors I speak to, it takes years for them to figure it out, or whether or not it just takes that long to narrow it down, or just to get it published. Like it's that it happens. So you're don't
Yeah.
worry, it's you're not alone there.
And
With your it's
one
your debut, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
And one
yeah,
interesting thing about it is I had the character arc of Yvonne pretty much set from the beginning. I knew what I wanted her arc to be. But Madeleine initially was a very one tone character. She was a diva and she was just obnoxious.
yeah,
and in one of my many rewrites, it occurred to me that she also should have some growth. And the facts I was writing about when I was adding scenes basically compelled her to have some character growth. So that was interesting to see also how the diva um, reacted to this moment in history.
yeah, yeah, because yeah, she makes a couple choices that hurt her. She couldn't that first initial one where she was like, "I'm not doing this. I'm not
Hmm.
performing for this man,"
Hmm.
and it bit her in the ass a bit, but in the long run, like the long game, it was the best choice she could have made.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it's so
Yeah.
crazy how that ends up because she suffered for it for sure, even though it was just basically her sticking to her morals.
Yeah. And so, what I was hoping to achieve in the book was to place readers in similar situations to understand how people at the time may have felt when they were trying to make the right choices and they were faced with a really complex situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what I would have done in either of their situations. I would hope I would make the right choice, but then again, it's like it's terrifying, right? It's
Yeah.
it's
And
free.
one thing that interests me about this period is so there's this scene in the book about the Veldiv roundup in 1942, which is very famous in France because it was actually done by French police. And they were ordered to do it by the Germans, but the French police did it. And they rounded up French Jewish citizens. And those people were deported to Auschwitz, and a lot of people died. That just something you want to grapple and do it in the right way. This is a very difficult situation, even in Paris, in France, because the French president only apologized for it in 1995. And so this was a real moment of shame for the French. And I'm French, so I wanted to present to the readers something where they could feel the difficulty in making the right decision and this moment of shame because it took 50 years even for the French to even apologize, for the head of the French government to apologize for the French police role in rounding up the Jews and sending them to death camps. And that was something that for a long time I did not want to write about. So I was hoping to just not even have to write the chapter. I had planned initially not even to touch that moment. I was planning on just ending earlier and then skipping ahead to the end of the war because it was so daunting to tackle something that has been so traumatizing for the country. And only after many rounds of revisions did I feel that this had to be part of the book. And it was just taking the easy way out not to write about it. And maybe I would write well about it and maybe I would mess up, but I needed to put myself out there and at least try to do a good job in honor of the people who suffered, were rounded up, and were murdered. And I had to do it. But that has been also very difficult for me to write about
I
those thoughts.
that you were like that like you had to handle it with care, right? I could tell that
Hmm.
you were like it you were almost dreading it, right? And it was When I was going I just remember one of the you painted the picture in our heads. I feel like I'm glad for one that you got it in there and that you made it happen because it really drives the point home because as a reader, I'm picturing when they're getting rounded up, oh, there's already a family in there with children and they're terrified, they're crying. And then when Madeline tries to save the day a little bit, tries to help,
Mhm.
and she's just seeing thousands and thousands of
Mhm.
people rounded up waiting for to be shipped off. And it was just like and again, like just the young children, the families. After I don't know, like I was reflecting on it because I was like, oh my God, like I can't imagine being in that position, like with any kind of like apocalyptic seeming situation. Like I have two like 3 and 7, and I'm like, God, that's terrifying. I don't know, as a mom, I'm like, did becoming like a parent humanize me a little bit, make me appreciate human life or appreciate like the difficulty of certain situations that like people had to go through decades ago, or like even more like feel for them more. And some of those scenes where it's just no, it's not yeah, they're characters, but it's not just adults, it's these are children. And I'm picturing children being rounded up, like, of course, pictures, unfortunately, like old photos and stuff like that of that time period of the Holocaust and everything like that. And it's so heartbreaking, but like as a reader, as a storyteller, for you to drive that home in almost like in real time as a reader's reading the book, like as a reader's like they're in that world, they're in that situation with the characters, and it was just like, oh Jesus, I was just I was it made me feel for them that much more, and then it's like a reminder, no, this happened, this was life for people in those countries, and it just adds another layer also, the fact that the Germans were making the French police do it. Like, that is
Mhm.
so messed up, right? That's so messed up, and it's so crazy because the characters, I really liked how you got into their mind. We got to see their mindset of really, like, who are they fighting back? Like, really, France was our country was taken over so easily. What is going They were just as confused and terrified, and they didn't it was just yeah, that reading some of those parts, like, I could tell I'm glad that you did it because it really drove it home, like, the angst and the horror and, like, just this how terrifying that situation is for not just for yourself, but for your kids. It was just oh, I, like, needed a minute. I was just like, "Okay. Oh my god."
Yeah, no, that was very traumatizing, and the the fact that they did it in July of 1942, the fact that involved the French police to do it, it was all made so that people would not revolt, and it was just a really disgraceful time. And I felt I would rather have people tell me I did not handle it correctly than just trying to just take the easy way out and not try to grapple it, even if it was just very stressful for me, because there will probably be people reading the book who've had grandparents living through this and maybe not surviving it. So I wanted to do an honest effort to be accurate and truthful.
Yeah, especially since we follow both the singers throughout the years, like leading up to. It's we know the time period. It's we know what's going to happen. We know what is happening. We know what's going to happen, and it's yeah. I can't imagine you following through that timeline and not including that very real part. And it was. I hope it was worth it for you because I feel as a reader it was totally worth it to me to read. For me to read, it drove that point home for sure.
Yeah, it was worth it, but it needed some time before I was ready to tackle it because so
Yeah.
many people died in the end. So you want to respect what happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So you did mention the research where you got the idea of the characters in this story and like the morality of it all. Was there anything else that you were like really surprised to learn or any more like fascinating things that you learned while you were researching for your book?
And the first thing I learned was that the initial opera singer that had interested me, Germaine Lubin, was not a good character for a book because she had zero character growth, which is why I split some of her attributes into Yvonne and Madeleine and made those attributes basically fight each other. This was a white wolf and a black wolf, and the one you feed is the one who wins. Because as a novel character, Germaine Lubin was just not a good character. She did not express publicly remorse for associating with the Nazis. But another thing I found out that I was surprised by was the director of the Paris Opera House during the war actually kept a number of Jewish musicians on the payroll even after the Germans made the French enact laws that would prevent the Jews from being in public servant. And in France, working for the Paris Opera House is actually viewed as a public servant job. And there were those small acts of courage that were not noticeable, but really impacted the people who were helped by those that I had not expected, because it was really courageous to do so. Because if the general manager had been discovered, he would probably have been killed by the Germans. And what surprised me is when we are often used to movies where people make big decisions and it's saves the days in really obvious fashion so everybody can think them. And then what I learned from my research is you also have a lot of people who do little small acts of bravery and don't even expect to ever be thanked for them, but they know it's the right thing to do. And some general manager in front of the Nazis still gave the money to the few Jewish musicians who would have starved after they were no longer allowed to be part of the orchestra.
Yeah, I thought that was thinking about it now, I'm like, yeah, of course something like that would have happened. Of course there were people who did whatever they could to try to help. And it's different circumstances, right? Like I can't if they're taking away like their rights and then they're taking away just basically their ability to live their own life, like their livelihood. And then there are other people who these are their colleagues, these are their friends, these are their peers. And I so appreciated that too, because it's just the more I think I like historical fiction because I feel like I'm learning. So it's like an example of something I was like, oh, of of course something like that happened. It was like, oh, I didn't know, but then I'm like, I'm not surprised kind of thing. And it's just adds to how much of a mess and how horrible. And then you think like, how did we get there? How did it get so bad where it was just this huge movement and it was just like overtaking so many countries and just straight up eradicating humans, like just like killing people. It was in mass genocide. It boggles my mind. And yeah, any type of World War II based historical fiction just takes me back there. And there's so many stories to tell, right? There's so many stories to tell, so many ways to tell them. And so I think that I don't know if I've read a book that was like from the France side though. So that was also very interesting because it was like, yeah, it was really pivotal. It was like a real moment that Germans invaded France and
Yeah.
took over that territory. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one thing you have to remember is, so now we know Germany was defeated back in 1945, but after France declared defeat in 1940, for the first few years, things were very gloomy. Like no one really knew how long this was going to last. The German occupation of France. And I think a lot of people thought maybe it's going to last until after the moment they die. People know it only lasts a couple of years, but at the beginning, it felt like it could last forever and they would never have a free Paris again. And I wanted to convey the gloom of history and still the attempt of the characters to try to keep their head high and do something for the better.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see how tricky that is, especially to, like, make the reader feel that, because it's like we said, yeah, we know what happens, but how do you get into the mindset of the characters who have no idea, like, what the future looks like, who have no idea if there's gonna if anything's gonna be okay again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think especially when you think about my Yvonne character, um, the reader today can tell she's making complex choices, but I'm hoping that they also can imagine that if they were in a situation, it would also not be a clear cut situation what to do when you try to keep your moral principles, but also save your son. And this is not a clear cut issue. In a lot of the books I read about World War II, authors like to focus on the heroes, the people who were part of the resistance, people who tried to fight from the start. And those are amazing people. And there were not too many of those at the beginning because the situation was so bleak. And like I said in the book, whenever a French person tried to resist a little bit, the Germans would round up 20 or 50 people and kill them all. So initially, it was just not something people would do because the consequences were so severe. And it's only after it looked like they maybe could win the war with the United States coming into the war and the Free French fighting from abroad and so on that the resistance developed. So I was trying to convey the bleakness of those years and still the moral fiber of my characters.
Yeah, and touching on the choices, like the hard choices that Yvonne had to make, and like I said earlier, like as the reader, I'm just don't do it. No. But it was like she almost the situation she found herself in, she didn't always have a choice for fear for her own life. And it started like fearing for her career, and then now she's straight up fearing for her life.
Hmm.
And that happens the same with Madeline too. But she did this, like she made those questionable decisions for her son. And it was so heartbreaking that because of those decisions that she made to save him, he despised her for it. Like he never forgave her for associating with the Nazis when she did. She used whatever resources and connections she could to keep him safe more than once. And I feel so bad for her. It's almost like twisting the knife, and where it's like he doesn't even want a relationship with her for the thing because of the things she's done, but she did it for him. And it was just like I think that added like a little bit to my heartstrings, like my broken heart a little bit as a mom. I'm like, Jules, come on, dude. And then I thought it was also interesting that because both Yvonne and Madeline, they go on different paths in their morals and how they're handling their situation, almost like they handle it the opposite ways of each other. And then they're the people who are closest to them end up collaborating with the opposite. Like Jules was on Madeline's side, Team Madeline, like they were, paired up. And then Madeline's husband, Henry, was working with Yvonne, like for his
Hmm.
career. And I just thought that was so interesting. Like, did that kind of come naturally, or was it just like part of the big picture? And like, how did you navigate like those character motivations and stuff like that?
I think for Madeleine and Henry, I wanted the contrast between Madeleine being more ethical and Henry just not feeling that strongly about it. And I wanted to have the reader think more deeply about what they would have done. Because they're so close, Madeleine and Henry, I wanted the reader to think about would I have been Madeleine or would I have been Henry? And I wanted to let the reader think about it because the characters are not as bad as a lot of people were during that time. And I wanted the contrast to raise some questions in the reader's mind. For your question about Henry, initially, because I've been writing this for 12 years, so initially Henry was not a conductor. He was the CEO of a manufacturing plant in the very first version of the book. And then about halfway through, I thought, no, actually, he has to also be a musician and make his own choice when he's exposed to this. And Jules, I always thought he would be some sort of artist, but initially I thought he would just be maybe a theater actor. And it was only around the time I decided Henry should be a conductor, I decided he should also be involved in music. So I think to answer your question, I have a very good idea of Yvonne first, a pretty good idea of Madeline first, and then it became even crisper when I thought, no, she also needs to have her own character arc. And the secondary characters became really clear in the last phase. In the end, I think it was a story I wanted to tell all along, but it took me a while to get to that point where I could actually tell it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I can see how tricky that could be, and on top of just balancing the dark subject matter and looking out for your own mental well-being, your own headspace, and you know what I mean? Just trying to get in the zone and be able to pull yourself out at the same time when you need to, so that you're not walking around doom and gloom, still stuck in your head after you walk away from the computer, right? I can imagine.
Yeah,
Uh,
another scene that I added at the end. So in addition to the Veldiv roundup, another chapter I added late was the chapter in Dijon in 1943. So those were part of the chapters I had not written initially, and I wanted to cut earlier and then skip to the end of the war because it was such a tough subject matter. But then I decided that my readers deserve to see also the scene in Dijon. I don't want to say too much about what happens when they travel to Dijon, but sometimes it's about the writer reaching the point where they feel they can do a good job tackling a very difficult subject the best they can. So that took some time.
yeah, I could totally see that. You touched on this earlier. What were the most challenging parts to write and then the most enjoyable parts to write?
Let's see. For a long time, the middle of the book was non existent, and I knew that was a problem. So that was challenging to figure out how to bridge the beginning of the book, which was pretty steady from the start. When they start before the war, I had a pretty good idea what I wanted to write there, and I knew how I wanted it to end with 1945 and beyond. Although the very last chapter is something I only wrote at the very end. But so I had a good idea of the beginning and the end, and the challenge was to bridge the two with the middle part, which is also why it took me a while to decide what I need to write in this middle, and including those chapters that end part two that I had not written before. Um, I would say a number of chapters were enjoyable for different reasons. The beginning was very enjoyable for me because it was the beginning almost from the start. So later I may have edited words, but I knew that was the beginning the way I wanted it. So I lost heart for the book a couple of times. And so when I would lose heart, I would reread the beginning and I would think, it's pretty good. I don't know how many people will want to read the book, but that's a solid effort and I'm proud of what I wrote. So I should keep going. And so that was enjoyable. And I think once I nailed the very end was also enjoyable because to me it felt satisfying, not too obvious, but also some things the readers would like to get to after spending so many pages with my characters. And it wasn't quite like that before. So when I felt it was really good, I really felt I had nailed down and that was really enjoyable. And then the parts like the Vel d'Iv or what happens in Dijon, where the parts I wrote much later, and so I had much more experience as a writer. And when I reread them, I felt I had done a solid job writing them. And so that was enjoyable for me to know, even if it's a tricky historical moment, that I did my best to do it justice. And I didn't try to write about it too early when I wasn't ready. And I felt what I wrote honored the moment and also all the drama that was going on with the characters and all the decisions I had to make. But then also, I have a day job in engineering, so
Mm.
whenever I can find time to write whatever part of the novel, even if I'm going to erase it later, I just find it enjoyable because I made the time to do something that really matters to me, whether I end up keeping it in the final version of the book or not.
Yeah, so you're an engineer,
Mhm.
and because that's, like, very, like, logic-based, and I
Mhm.
think that's wild that you found time to explore that creative side and accomplish it.
Yeah, but so I've wanted to be a writer since I was 5.
Okay.
In the French system, when you go in school, they steer you towards math, science, engineering. And I found that I was really good at engineering. And it's been useful for me to have a day job that uses a different part of my brain so that at the end of the day, the part of my brain that is creative and makes up fictional stories is still fresh and I can write in the morning, in the evening, I can do it. A lot of people I know who are also writers but have a job in writing programs say they struggle a little more to have the bandwidth to write their own creative stuff when they have to grade students about their own short stories or novel excerpts and so on. So I feel I used to feel I wanted to be professor of creative writing and it would have been more aligned. But now I feel that it has helped me to have another way to serve society because I teach students engineering, optimization, data science. So I still feel I contribute to the world, but I keep my creativity for my writing. But it took me many years to accept it. Initially, I thought I should have just only been teaching writing and I was scattering myself too thin by having multiple things I was good at. And in the end, it's the story you tell yourself becomes true. So if you tell yourself you're scattering your energy by being good at multiple things, you're going to make it true. And if you tell yourself you're actually really lucky to be good at a couple of things so that you can serve your students in a way that is really going to be helpful, but also conserve your creativity for your own creative pursuits on your own novels, that's also going to be true. It's whatever you choose to believe. But also, it probably delayed how long it took me to finish the book and get it published. But again, it's a story that you choose to believe that ends up being true. And so I like to think I gained a lot of life experience and empathy for different types of characters from being in my faculty position teaching engineering and interacting with a lot of different students. And I think maybe I would not have been exposed to this if I had a different life path. So it was not easy, but I like that it unfolded the way it did.
Yeah. You gotta pay the bills, right? You gotta find some way to feed yourself, keep a roof over your head. I love that. I think that is so cool that you were like, "Okay, fine." You eventually were just like, "Okay, fine. I'll do this engineering thing," and then in here and there, when your own little secret project that fulfilled that part of you.
Yeah, but I want to add also, what helped me come to terms with it is I've had engineering students who I have really helped, who were really in the ditch for whatever reason. And sometimes other professors are too busy to realize it. And perhaps because I'm more empathetic than normal, because I also write those novels and so on, I was able to notice some stuff that other people had not noticed and help students. So at the end of the day, the career path in engineering that I chose allowed me to make a difference in the life of a couple of students. You want to hope you make a difference in a lot of students, all the students you teach. But like the big difference, you don't want to do it too often because that's too stressful.
Yeah.
It's just like you think like the downside, like it would have been bad if I hadn't been there. So you don't want to stress out about the downside too much. But there have been students who really got to where they were because I happened to teach the class that I registered for one time, sometime in college. And it gives me a lot of joy. Also, because my mom was a teacher in a community college, and so she loved teaching students from diverse background. And she died before the novel got accepted for publication. She died unexpectedly, but she was my biggest supporter, and she always wanted me to dedicate the book to her. She wanted me to sign the book to her when it was published, and so that's why when we got the book ready for publication after she had passed away, I dedicated it to her, to my mother, and that's because she had so much wanted to see the book, and she cared so much about her students and my students, and it felt like everything came together in a real nice way.
Oh, yeah, that's so meaningful. But oh, you got it. You could rest easy knowing that you made it. So just a couple more questions before we wrap up. What advice do you have for Yvonne, Madeline, and Jules?
The advice I would have for Madeleine is probably the easiest to articulate because Madeleine is a big diva who is famous even as the book starts. And I would tell her, lady, it takes a village for even one person like you to become so famous, especially for opera productions that involve so many other cast members, crew members. And I would tell her to be more thankful and grateful for the role other people have played in the background in a success, even if it's a tiny role, like a crew member doing a good job to put scenery on stage. And so that's what I would tell her, not to think it's just because she is good. She's good, she's definitely good, but acknowledge the work of other people in helping her shine at her brightest. For Jules, who is Yvonne's son, I would say give people a little bit of grace and see the gray instead of a black and white, which doesn't mean acknowledging, absolving people from wrongdoing, but understand that there were difficult decisions to be made and don't shut out your mom like that. And I think he was very young in the novel when he enlists in the war and so on. So I think he was still very absolute in his decisions. And I would hope that what happened during the war would help him give other people a little bit more grace, which doesn't mean forgiving them or saying it was not a big deal whatever they did, but just being a little more forgiving. There's more advice I could give him, but then I would give away the end of the book, so I'm not going to say
Yeah,
more. But
I'll listen to you anyway.
yeah, right. I mean, Jewel does whatever he wants, and for Yvonne, I think I wouldn't have any advice to give her. I think I would just have to take her hands and tell her, I'm sorry you got put into this position, because the way I set it up was she pretty much wasn't going to have a lot of choice once it starts unraveling. And I wish she had been a different 15-year-old or 17-year-old so she wouldn't have gone through all this. But I tried to write the novel so that it would almost feel like she did not really have that much of a choice given the situation she got herself in and her son got himself in.
Yeah, yeah. You're just like, I'm sorry. I don't, yeah, you're like respecting the character. I'm thinking of a person she'd probably be like, but you did this to me. I'm not taking advice from you. Like, who do you think you are trying to like,
Yes, like, girl, you want to give me advice? You should have put me in better situations.
yeah, yeah. That's so funny. I love that. Okay. Aurelie, what is next for you? Are you working on anything that you could talk about?
Yes, I'm finishing a novel that is set in Madrid at the end of the Spanish Civil War. And the central character is school teacher, a young school teacher, and her
Mm.
husband gets arrested by the new people in power, who are the people who were against democracy and who are going to start a dictatorship. And she has to decide how to try to get him released, if she can get him released, because he's from a very wealthy family. So there are just a lot of moral choices again. There are also different layers to it, because I started being interested in Spain at that time in 1939. When I look at the country today, and we are very divided, and every side feels very strongly there's a right side and the others don't understand. And Spain in 1939 was actually very similar to that. And I thought, if we're ever going to reconcile and move forward as a country, we need to think about previous historical times and what happened then. And so I wanted to create a story where both sides were really convinced they had a moral ground, and put some characters in the middle of it and having to make their choices. So that hopefully will be my next novel.
Yeah, I can imagine it's the same challenge. Like you're trying to see what you could do with the characters and what choices that they're gonna make and just really put them through just really put them through it.
Yeah. I like having strong female characters, even if they live in times where women were not supposed to be strong characters, and try to see what sort of choices they could really make at the time and have them grapple with history. So we'll see if I succeed or not.
Yeah, I'll be sure to look out for that because I think, yeah, you could do some interesting things there. Okay, Aurelie Thiele, where can we find you online and on social media?
I'm Aurélie underscore Thiele, both on Instagram and on X. And by the time you release this podcast, my new website will be up. And that will be Aurélie Thiele in one word.com.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll include the links in the show notes and stuff, so we'll be all set. Okay, so the Paris Understudy, that book is available on September 10th. Yorli, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all these fascinating details. And like I said, your next title that you're working on, if and when it comes out, feel free to get back in touch. I'd love to chat again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the detailed attention you took in reading the book. I really appreciate your insights. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
And there you go. That was Aurélie Thiele talking about the Paris Understudy. That book is available now. Check out the show notes to find links on where you can find her online and on social media and where you could purchase the book. While you're wandering around online looking for your favorite authors to follow, go ahead and find Cantina Book Club as well. Give me a follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you need book recommendations, check out cantinabookclub.com. You can also subscribe so that you never miss a beat. because even though if I'm not, interviewing the authors, I'm still reading and reviewing books. So be sure to keep up with that in case you're looking for any type of genre really that's coming out or that's recently come out that I'm recommending. If you find any books that you like and you find authors that you like, please go ahead and if you can leave a review on a Goodreads and Amazon. It really does help them out. Pre-orders help them out, and overall sales help the authors out because they can't get more book deals if nobody knows what they've been doing and how popular it is or how much people want more. But either way, thank you guys so much for listening.